Hi folks, this is Tanner Reid, Product Design Engineer at Autodesk, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a 3D model of our new Fusion logo. So if you haven't seen it, it's a little bit more curved and sort of geometrically complex than our last logo. And if you tried to make this parametrically, it would involve a lot of really tricky steps and, lofting wizardry to get all that to work. So instead, I'm going to be showing you how to do it with the sculpting mode. And I know a lot of times we sort of see workflows where you're starting off from a box or a cylinder and kind of twisting it and shaping it into what you want. But I think this is a really good opportunity to explore a couple of tools that let us, build certain faces on top of the image so that we can work from a drawing, or in this case from an image of the logo, and build off of it rather than shape things to it. So I know the actual project might be a little bit frivolous, but hopefully these are some really great tools that can show you how to approach your projects in a new way. So we're going to start off by inserting an attached canvas. If you haven't used these before, they're a really great tool. It lets you pick a certain face in the space. In this case, we're going to do one of our origin planes. And when you choose an image, it's going to import that image into Fusion, and you can go in here and scale it and move it around and actually design off of it. So it's sort of like a reference in space for you to work from. So on that, I want to make sure that I have my opacity, at a good place. In this case, maybe something like 36, so that if we're designing anything behind it, we can see through it to make those. And if we make sure that display through is checked, that way we can design on top of it and still see it through what we're designing. So we get a lot of versatility in that sense. So I can say OK. And if you haven't done this before, another great tool is to calibrate things. And so if you right-click it in the browser, you can choose Calibrate. And you can pick 2 points on the image. So let's say that, if I know that from top to bottom it's 120 millimeters, I can type that in Fusion will scale it for me. For this project, we don't really need a certain scale. It's more of an exercise, and in the end, it'll be very scalable what we make. So that can all come later. But right now, just so that you know, that's a great tool when working with canvases. So what I want to do first is kind of decide how I'm going to approach, how I'm interpreting the three-dimensionality of this image. So right now, obviously, it's 2D, but we can kind of, we can see a lot of shadows here. We can see where things might be sloping, kind of how things connect to each other. I'm going to pick, the way that I think is easiest and best for us to learn from. If you want to play with it and find some other ways, feel free to. That's a lot of fun. But looking at it, I can kind of see that this surface here and this surface are shaded very similarly, and they almost look like they're coplanar to me, like they're on the same plane. And so I'm going to assume for this case that these two planes are planar, so they're flat, and they lie on the same plane, and they're on top. So I'm kind of picturing these being up high, and these edges being our lower surface, with these two surfaces connecting in between that top and that bottom. So you'll kind of see as we go what I mean by that. But to get started, I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to choose Create Form. That brings us into the sculpting environment. And I'm going to go under Create, and I'm going to choose Face. So when you're doing faces, you want to pick a plane to start from. And I'm going to zoom in so we can start with this little arm that's here. And faces just let you click on 4 different points, and it builds a face between those 4 points. So I'm just going to make 2 rectangles to represent the main part of this. And to make this curved part, I want to make a series of triangles, sort of like, 4 radial triangles coming out to represent that. But those 4 triangles need to meet at a center point that's in between these 2 rectangles. So I'm just going to go to Modify. I hit Escape there. I'm going to go to Modify and choose Insert Edge. And if I double click, it's going to give me a line that's halfway between these. And when I click OK, it'll put that in there for me. And now I can go back to Create, choose Face, and I can choose that same plane that we're drawing from in the beginning. And I can now go in and make my 4 triangles that come out to this point, and I can bring them back to intersect right there. Remember, we were working on a tool that's giving us 4 different points to make these T-spline faces. But if you bring your 4th point, or your 3rd point, excuse me, back to your original yellow dot, that's going to go ahead and give you a triangular shape instead of a quadrilateral. So you can kind of work with triangles just as easily as you're working with the rectangles. So I'm just going to build out 4 of these triangles right there. And then I'm going to say OK. Now when I say OK, it should have gone through and given this a curved surface. That's what we would expect if we were building these faces. We want to be able to have these tangential lines between them. but it didn't. It left it sort of in a boxy shape, and the reason for that is that there's something wrong. So if I look here, I've got a line that's thicker than the other ones, which means that it's probably not connected at one of the points, which means I didn't click correctly to weld them together. But there's a great tool. Instead of going through and figuring out what happened wrong, I can go to Modify and choose Utilities and use the tool called Repair Body. And so with that, I can click on this shape that I've made, and you'll see a little star that shows up, and that star is telling you that it thinks that's probably where your problem is. So when I clicked on Auto Repair, it welded those vertices together to make them into a shape that it figures you probably want. And now we've got that curved surface that goes around, so we know that this is now a watertight surface. So if I click on OK, I can go up to Edit Form, and I can just move these points around to match up with that back canvas that we have. So we can, again, keep referencing this image that we're working from. And I'm just going to try to get it roughly. Again, later, at any point in the process, we can go through and define these to be, any other, positioning or alignment. This looks good for me for now, so I can say OK. And if I zoom out, you'll see that we've got that first top surface that's there. And you can see that lying flat right there. So the next thing I want to do is make another surface that's equally as flat, or equally on the same plane, right here on this top piece. So to do that, I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to choose Face again, and I'm going to choose the same back face, or the back plane that we were designing this one on. And I'm going to come in and start drawing out 4 rectangles to make up this top arm. So I'm going to go here. Let's see. And again, these can be very rough. They don't have to be perfect. Bring that around. So you can see the top of that starting to shape up. And then from there, I'm just going to go ahead and take this all the way down. And then for the last one, I'm just going to choose a triangle instead of a rectangle so that we come out to that point. And there we've got our 2 flat surfaces on the top. And if everything worked out, that should make it curved. Excellent. So the next thing that we want to do is shape out these 2 surfaces that go in between them. So I'm going to start on this left side because that's a lot easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I just did. I'm going to go to Create and say Face. I'm going to choose that back plane. And I'm going to start by clicking on this shape, that corner there, and coming across to this point. And this is important to note. I want this corner to be a sharp edge here, and so I'm making a rectangle that has that corner on it. If instead you were to have 2 points coming together, so if I came across and did a line here, that would end up making a curve across that surface, but I want to keep it a point, so I'm just making sure that I have a corner rectangle here, which gives me a triangle on this piece. And so from there, I'm just going to continue going down and designing out the edges. So I'm going to finish this off the same way I started. So I'm going to make sure that I've got a rectangle that comes to a point there in the corner. And then I'm going to fill in my 2 triangles that are left over to finish out that surface. So once I've done that, I can say OK. And it looks like it brought it back into box mode. So what I'm going to do is, again, go to Modify, Utilities, and Repair Body. If I click on it, you'll see 2 different points that it's bringing up. I can say Auto Repair, and hopefully that'll clean it up, and it did. That's good. And I can say OK. Now if you'll see when it comes out and it makes those curves, it sort of shifts everything over. But if I double click on, let's go to Create Modify first and say Crease. And if I double click on this line, it's going to select the entire edge. And I can also choose the 2 edges that come off of it there. And now we've got a creased edge that goes along that same path that we drew these. And so from there I can say OK. And now we've got a nice smooth line. You can kind of see our canvas still showing through. And it's a pretty good relationship there. And so the next thing I want to do is just make sure that I clean up this edge a little bit. So I'm just going to take our points and shift them over a little bit and make sure that it aligns with that little bit of a curve that happens as we go up the body of the F. And these things, I mean, obviously, are as good and accurate as you want them to be and want to take the time to do. They can be as, artful or thrown together as as you have the time for. I'm just throwing them together rather quickly, so they're not going to be perfect, but you get the idea anyways. So we can bring that over. What's that? Could be like 2 degrees maybe. Something like that. All right, good. So you've got the outside of the F. We've got the 2 planes that are coming together here. And what we have to do now is design the surface that goes between them. And so if you can imagine, if these 2 are up, this one is sloping down, then this surface is going to have to slope down and then back up to meet the new plane. So what I'm going to do is draw a sketch that defines for me where I want that trough to lie, and then I'll start sculpting around that. So if I go up to Sketch, I can say Create Sketch, and I can choose that back plane again. And now I just want to draw a spline for where that's going to lie. So if I go to Sketch, I can choose Spline. And I want the downward sloping region to sort of come off right here. And I'm just going to pull this over something really rough like this. And once I do that, I can take these edges here and sort of twist them to represent the shape that I'm looking for, which in this case is something sort of like that. So the idea here is that everything on the left side or above this line is going to be sloping down. Everything on the right is going to be sloping towards that center line as well. Sort of like, where a roof comes together, where you have like a lower spot. So if that's my trough, I'm going to adjust it just a little bit. Be a little bit more. Take off this horizontal constraint and spin it a little bit. Zoom in. Something a little bit more like that. That looks good. So we've done that. I can say Stop Sketch. And now I have a reference curve that I can use to design my faces to, that trough. So I'm going to start with what's easy. I can go to Create and say Face. Choose that same plane again. And what I want to do here is just create one that slopes down and comes across out from, sort of radially from this semicircle that we have here on our flat surface already. And so when we come across, this is going to get a little bit tricky because we're going to have to start making triangles for things. So if I've got a rectangle here, I'll find that we want to come across to this point, just like that. And then I can make triangles, a rectangle for this point and finish it off with a triangle on this side. So that looks good. I think that'll probably shape up pretty well. On the other side, I know for sure that I can put a triangle in here. That one's pretty obvious to me. And then we can put in a rectangle as well. But if we're looking at all of this space, it gets a little bit wonky kind of quick. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start filling in. This one looks definitely like it's a rectangle. The next one can probably also be a rectangle before we start getting into a triangle. And then we'll do, let's see, one more. I'm going to choose the end of that spline, and I'm going to come across to match it. And then I'll say, okay. Good, and that looks like it's following it pretty well. It's not perfect. I'm going to scoot it in just a little bit there. All right. And now what we want to do, I forgot, actually, I'll tell you what, let's crease this one first. Let's go to Modify and say Crease. Let's go ahead and crease these edges. That way we get back our original shape and it keeps them flat there. There we go. Say okay. Good, so that's still lining up and we can kind of see our surface start to shape. So from there I want to go to Create and say Face again. And this time I want to choose that same plane and I want to start building out what that downward sloping face is going to look like. So on here I can just zoom in a little bit, pull this guy around. Later. Okay, and then let's go back, face. Bring that over there. Excellent. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and connect a couple of these points But you'll notice now that we've got sort of a different amount of rectangles on this side as we do this side. And that's okay. That just means that they won't translate directly across from each other. So we can go ahead and make a triangle here instead of a rectangle. And then maybe put a rectangle in at this point. And we might need another triangle. Let me count. Yeah, let's do another triangle across here. And then the next one can be a rectangle. All right, that looks good. And if we say okay, hopefully those will all curve out without any problems. They did. Excellent. Okay. So from there, now we need to go ahead and crease our edge to go along that flat line there. So I'm just going to double click on this edge. It's going to select all of them. And if I go to modify and say crease, that'll give us that edge back. Say okay. And now for the time being, I want to crease that troughed edge that I put in there. And that's mostly just for me to see sort of how that curvature is going to look. It's just easier for me to wrap my head around. So I'm going to hide my sketches and I'm going to go back to crease. And I'm going to choose these lines coming around just so that we can see what they're going to look like. There we go. And then I'll say okay. And so now if I hide my canvas, you can see that we've got the basic shape of what we want the F contours to be. And if I look at my creased edge here, that looks like a pretty smooth curvature. I'm kind of happy with that. The top piece looks good. This one looks good. I think our shapes are good. So what I'm going to do now is raise up these two surfaces that we said were going to be higher than the other ones. So if I go to Edit Form, I can choose faces here on the selection filter. And if I shift double click the one next to it, it's going to do the entire row going across. And I'm going to hold down shift and then select these remaining pieces as well. And now if I go to the side view, in this case the bottom view, I'm going to drag that up. And you'll see now where those shapes have come up off of those base profiles that we made. So with that, I'm going to say okay. And now I'm just going to look around and kind of see what our curvature looks like, where there are weird points. I think everything looks okay. So what I'm going to do now is double click on that creased line that we had, and I'm going to say uncrease. And then I'm going to say okay. And I'm going to show just shaded rather than shaded with visible edges. And it looks like we've got a pretty good curvature going across there. I can go in and edit all of those control points to see if we can get it smoother. You might find places that look a little bit weird, like this looks like it might be a little bit tight in that corner. So I can go back to visual style and say show shaded with visible edges. And maybe that would mean that this point should move over a little bit to kind of, let's choose point. Maybe this point needs to move over a little bit to sort of alleviate some of that stress that's in the corner there. And again, you can also turn on your, turn your canvas back on while you're doing that. Either way, you can kind of work out the curvatures. I think this one looks fine. We don't have anything that's really pinching off weird. Everything looks pretty smooth. And so from that, we have a surface of the new logo. I'm just going to make it three-dimensional for you real quick. There's a ton of ways to do that. If you look the way that we designed it, we've got some holes on the sides. And so I want to do a boundary fill that just caps off each of the edges and closes it off on the bottom. So what I'm going to do there is go to Sculpt, and I'm going to choose the patch environment. And in the patch environment, we never exited our form. So I'm going to say return to the form because it's telling me now there's an error in our form. So I'm going to say return. And we're going to find what's wrong with this. It says coincident vertices may need to be welded together. So I'm going to say close on that. And I'm going to go to modify, utilities, repair body. I'm going to choose this guy. And let's see if it gives us some pain points. There's a couple. I'll say auto repair and see how it fixes it. Say okay. And then let's go in here and show shaded with visible edges. And then we'll say finish form. Let's see if that fixed our problem. It did. So we're back out now. That fixed whatever was going on here. And so then I can go to my modeling space and actually choose patch. And what I can do now is create a sketch. And I'm going to put that sketch on the bottom plane. And this is the same plane that we put the canvas on. It's the same plane that this edge exists on. And I'm going to go to Sketch, and I'm going to choose Project Include and Project. And what that's going to let me do is choose a profile of the body. And right now it's showing me that my sketches are hidden, so I'm going to go back and hide my first sketches and just show the sketch that I'm doing here and say OK. And so now I can say Stop Sketch, and you'll see that from the top, it's just projected that onto the plane below it. And so then if I go to Create, I can choose Extrude. And Extrude in Patch Environment is going to extrude a surface of the outline of the profile that I clicked on. And then I can say OK. And so now if you look, we've got a profile kind of surface outline with the top that we've made in the sculpting mode. And we also have a plane that exists on the bottom, so we can do a boundary fill to fill all that in. So if I go to Create, I can say Boundary Fill. I can choose that outside piece that I just made. I can choose the F that we created, and I can choose this bottom plane that we drew everything on. And once you have a volume that encloses anything, it'll show up there in green, and I can say Select Cells, and I can pick that green volume and say OK. And now if you'll look in our Bodies folder, we've still got our 2 original surfaces, but if I hide them, I've got one left over that's a solid body, and it's that Fusion F. And if you wanted to make this thicker or whatever, you can go into Model and say Extrude and pull that off. Bunch of things you can do with this now if you want to inlay it into something, whatever you're working with. But hopefully you get a good sense now of how you can actually go through and design this model off of an attached canvas. And if you wanted to get really spot on, we can add plastic appearance with Fusion's exact colors in it. So I hit A, which is a shortcut for appearance. And let's say I go to Plastic, Opaque. We can make this glossy yellow. And if I double click it, I can type in Fusion's orange RGB values, which is 238 and 136 and 34. And then I can say Done. And now we've got our Fusion F from just bringing in an attached canvas, tracing over faces with it in sculpting mode, editing those faces, pulling them around a little bit, and then finally coming out and making it a solid with a boundary fill. So pretty simple process. If you have any other ideas on how you'd make this F or something similar to it, or you've got other great uses for these tools, feel free to leave comments down there in the comments section or tweet me at Tanner Reid. We love hearing that kind of stuff. And feel free to leave any questions as well. And then also feel free to subscribe to the Fusion 360 YouTube channel. It's a great place to find tutorials and tips and tricks and user stories and great things to kind of inspire you with your own projects as well. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.